Instead, what is meaningful might only be discovered later, right? What might be meaningful is that he's returning to these places where he was really battered and where he was terrified, where as a little child, he saw violent things. And now he's visiting there with his son. And so to some extent, he can go back to these places and talk back to it and say, I am not the child who was terrorized. Or he can go back to these places or he can in his own head say that, oh, these people who love me have seen this bit of my past. And so he had an idea as to what meaningfulness felt like. What he experienced was not that, but it was still meaningful. He just hasn't yet processed it. Um, and all of us, we try to talk to our families, we try to understand them, but we don't have the best tools for it. We're talking to our families with concepts, ideas, which maybe they cannot appreciate, and maybe we cannot. We think that this is how things should be, but they're not that way. And so communication only occurs over time. We say one thing, and the thing we say is stupid. We say a second thing, and the second thing is also stupid. But these stupid things need to be said before we can actually begin to say the things that are close to our heart. We need to say the stupid things so that we can then say, oh, that is not the right thing to say. And so we have to recognize that these mistakes are part of how we discover the truth. But it's just a privilege getting to talk to you guys and getting to share a little bit of my own journey in writing the book and thinking about the book. And if there are any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them.
Thank you. I wanted to start off, and then I know students have lots of questions. I'm just going to get my, I guess it pretty much is the origin of why I selected this book for the course, and what prompted me to reach out to you. Since spring 2017 was when I was looking for a novel for the book, for a novel for my course, and I picked up yours and I read it. And I remember that first semester I signed it to students. I did receive some comments they were just wondering, why would I pick a depressing book for them to read? Why would you assign this book for us? And over the years since then, I don't tend to get that response. And I think I'm just much more comfortable with my choice of picking the book for the course. But it wasn't, it was upon reading my students this semester, particularly reading their responses. And I noticed some of my students that come from collectivist cultures and some from more individualistic cultures had different responses to your book. And I think overall, all of my students were deeply connecting with parts of your book. And so this semester I thought I started looking you up on YouTube, and I started watching some of your visits to bookstores, I guess, when the book first came out. And you mentioned that you wrote this book and you wanted it to be useful. And when I heard you say that, I was like, I need to contact him, because I feel we are using your book. It is a launching point for our course to really understand some of the tensions and dynamics in family. And I'm just curious about when you said you wanted your book to be useful. It sounds like there are a lot of reasons that you have for why you wrote the book. But useful was interesting to me because that was the word that made me want to reach out to you.
When I think of what is useful, right, to some extent, all books are useful in that they take away our loneliness. When we listen to somebody else's troubles, when we listen with an open heart to somebody else's troubles, we are taken out of ourselves. And then when we go back to our own lives, we have the sense that we're living in a larger world. And so our own lives trouble us less. And so in that sense, all books are useful. I think that the way that I feel that my book is useful it's useful the way that all books are, but it's useful also in terms of talking about the loneliness that many people experience when their families are traumatized. So Ajay's family is traumatized, and he is lonely in his own way. I think that another way that the book might be useful is that it talks about how inside a society we can pretend to be something else. So Ajay tells lies and tells lies about his brother, but in some way the mother also tells lies about what the family is. And the father in some ways just doesn't care, right? In some ways the father might be the only non-liar in the book because the guy is just getting drunk. He just doesn't care. And I think that many people, many immigrants actually feel the pressure of society, feel the pressure of other people's gaze more strongly than people who grew up in America or who were born in America, non-immigrants. And so there were all these different ways that I thought it could be helpful.
Thank you. Yes, and I would like to turn it over to students now and their questions. We have a discussion board in our Canvas shell, and we can use the order for the discussion board. My recollection is that Art had a question, the first question there. So if you open up your discussion boards, we'll go in that order, and we can start off with Art.
Hello, it's nice to meet you, Mr. Sharma. I was wondering, so you said it was about 13 years that you were writing this book, and I was wondering, upon completion of writing the book, how long did it take to revise? Yeah, it's I'm trying to be more creative with writing and not just be a documentary filmmaker. So I'm trying to use portions of my life and distill it and put it into some of the art, yeah, the way you did.
Mm. So congratulations for doing that. You know, it's a very brave thing. And all art is difficult. And I think to some extent, art based on our own life is easier in certain ways and harder in other ways. You know, when art is based on our own lives, we become hampered in terms of inventing. We are always testing what we've invented against what actually occurred. And so some of our talent gets confused. And it's easier in certain ways because there are many things we don't need to invent. So some of the work is already done for us. It took me 12 and a half years from starting the book to when it was emailed to my editor. And then after it was emailed to my editor, it didn't take long because the book was mostly done at that point. It took a long time just because it took a long time to figure out how to tell the book, tell the story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. It's my turn. Y'all waiting on me? Okay. So again, thank you so much for speaking to our class today. This is a great privilege. My question for you was, while writing your book, did you ever find points like where you felt stuck, that you didn't know like how you were gonna move forward or how you were gonna figure out how to finish whatever it is that you were currently on to kind of finish out the remainder of your story? And what did you do to kind of get over that, quote unquote, writer's block?
So if you're ever experiencing writer's block, right, the easiest way to handle it is to lower your standards. You know, to think in terms of to tell yourself that the book or story you're writing doesn't have to be good. It only sort of has to look like a story or a book. Because once you've written something down, then you can at least edit it.
Mm-hmm.
but I regularly ran into problems where I didn't know how to go forward. So I would regularly run into situations where I didn't know how to connect one thing to the other. So to me, the book has a lot of things occurring in it, but it doesn't have a lot of causation. Just because the father is depressed or stressed doesn't mean that he has to become an alcoholic, right? Like alcoholism, just because the um, parents are, unhappy, they have to how their child is receiving care, doesn't mean they have to bring him home. And so regularly I would get to places and not know how to move forward because causation was weak, right? A was not causing B, B was not causing C.
Right.
And so with the lack of causation, I didn't feel confident moving forward. And what I basically had to do was sort of grit my teeth and just jump forward. I had to jump forward and then hope that the reader would follow along. There's certain techniques, certain technical choices you can make to encourage the reader to follow along. But I was regularly running into these things. And the shape of the book is very strange because it has sort of two beginnings and two endings. So,
Right.
And that also sort of, it was hard to figure that out because it causes a different, normally you're using symmetry to shape a book, but if you have two different beginnings, the shape of the book gets sort of wonky.
Right.
So there were all these different technical challenges. But largely the way you move forward is by just saying, oh, it doesn't have to be that good. So that's what I would say.
Okay. All right. Definitely. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hi, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to know what you thought about how quarantining and the coronavirus is going to impact how families communicate and operate.
That's a very good question. I imagine, right, that the first thing that we always do is fall back onto our coping strategies, right? So the first thing that a family does is try to figure out some way to maintain the status quo. So whether that means that people are spending more time looking at their phones, or people are spending more time, they figure out some way to live together, but ignore each other more. So I grew up in India, right? And we would have 6 or 7 people in a 1-bedroom apartment. And we figure out a way to self-quarantine, right? So you're all living together. You're not, you're on top of each other. And yet it seems like you have plenty of space, because you're just not doing things. The problem is that many families have designed their status quo with being able to get out, and there I don't know what's going to happen. What are the new ways that they're going to try to figure out how to maintain stasis?
Thank you.
Hello. Well, welcome to our course. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to come and talk to us. So I had a couple questions. So whenever I was reading your book, I know you kind of answered this, but I was just wondering, did you purposely put like special influence on the coping mechanisms of how the family like handled the trauma? I know you mentioned, like AJ would
I
turn
don't
things.
think I put it. Oh, I don't know if I put in. I don't know how conscious I was of doing that. I think I was just trying to represent how I and my family handled it, and we handled it in weird ways. So it wasn't designed for that purpose. The book was not designed for that purpose. The book was designed just to be a memorial, and part of memorializing the family was representing how the family handled the situation. So the coping mechanisms represented inside the book came out of the coping mechanisms that my family used.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
So my question for you was very similar to Ahmad's question, but I was kind of just asking, like, do you think that communication styles in families are going to change because of this COVID-19, or do you think that it will bring families closer together?
I doubt the communication styles are going to change. I mean, the thing that you have to remember is how hard it is for anyone to change, right? Like who you are now is very different from who you were 10 or 15 years ago. But who you are now is not that different from who you were 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. So I don't think communication styles are going to change. I don't think they're going to change. I mean, not in terms long term, right? Not long term. The expectation that I have is that for some people this will be a learning opportunity. You know, when we get sick and somebody takes care of us despite the fact that we're sick and not useful, right? Like if you think that your worth is primarily the fact that you're useful to somebody, and when you're no longer useful and the other person is still loving you and taking care of you, that's going to affect your understanding of the other person and the understanding of your own value. But I don't think COVID is going to cause people's communication styles to change much.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Hey, Mr. Sharma, how you doing? Jeremiah, thank you for coming to our class. Really appreciate it. I had two questions. They're pretty short in general. The first question is, what was one of the biggest emotional hurdles you faced in writing this book? You add a lot of hints of really trying to dig deep into these characters, although pseudo-fictional. I find if I were to do the same, I'd have a little bit of challenge. I just want to see what was one of the biggest ones you faced and then how you got through that.
So for me, it was just depressing. Like who wants to think about this stuff, you know, day in, day out? Like who wants to think about illness and parents who behave badly? So just having to spend time with this depressing stuff that bothered me. So that would be the biggest challenge, having to spend my time thinking about depressing stuff. So and tell me, what was your other question?
That's awesome. Thank you. That sounds sort of like a Nietzsche-esque mindset. And then my other question was just, did you notice a difference in how your family engaged with you since you became a professional author?
I'm sorry, I lost the last part of your question. Did I notice a difference between
the way that your family like engaged with you or treated you when you became a professional writer?
I mean, I was a professional writer before I wrote this book. So I'd written stories and a novel before I wrote this book. My mother now is terrified of saying things in front of me because she thinks I might put it into a book. But other than that, not really. I mean, my family, nobody reads, you know, so it's not a big deal.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you answering my questions.
Hi, Mr. Sharma. I just had a quick question for you about the ending of the book. So when I had finished the book, I was so curious about why you had ended it the way that you did. And I wanted to know what you meant by I have a problem, the very last sentence of the book?
That's a lovely question. And it's the sort of question that I get a lot. And the ending of the book took forever. I wrote the ending of the book and then I took it out. And I showed it to a bunch of different people, asking them what to do, whether to leave it in or whether to take it out. And many people said to take it out, but the people whom I respected said to keep it in. So the ending of the book is intended to cause you to think, what did I overlook? Right? What have I mistake? What did I not pick up because I don't get it? Right? That's the intention of the book. And the intention of the ending. And the idea of it is when he's there and he is taking this drunk girl out of the pool and she's leaning against him, and he looks out at this incredibly beautiful landscape, right? And with this drunk girl leaning against him, and he feels like he's home. That's when he knew he had a problem. He feels good when he is taking care of drunk. So that was the idea behind it, that this trigger, it isn't normal. Like so the scene is based on me being in the Maldives at the fort. And I remember looking at this seaplane and thinking, why the hell am I doing this shit? Right? Why am I taking care of a rich person? Right? I'm in the Maldives. I have a seaplane sitting over there. And thinking, something wrong with me that I keep getting into these problems. Right? The problem is not the other person. The problem is not the situation. The problem is me and how I have been shaped by this life. So that's
Well,
where
thank you very much for answering.
So that's where it came from. But the effect of it is based on a separate tradition. So that's the logic of it. That's the logic of it. But the effect of it is something different. The logic of it is based on sort of a modernist tradition, where you get to the end of a novel, and the point of the novel is to get you to understand what the novel is about, right? So the very ending of Proust is when he says, "Oh, I had to go back home and write all this down," right? And so we've read 2,500 pages, so he can go and write it down. And so we have not understood that the point of the journey is so we can understand ourselves.
I'll go next. Hi, Akhil. Hope you're well. Or Mr. Sharma. I don't know if I can use that. I don't know you casually, I just got to be careful. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about, I guess going back to the ending of the book, kind of like Asia was saying, where a lot of families, though, experience this kind of similar situation I thought it was pronounced AJ, but that's probably just because I'm white, but it's Ajay, right?
Ajay, yep.
Ajay, okay, awesome. Where they kind of become really upset with their family life, and they never really end up finding the solutions to their problems. So I just guess for people that are in a kind of similar spot where they can't talk to their family because they're past, or maybe they aren't on talking terms or anything like that, what's the best way for people that are in this situation, I guess, to just find closure for themselves, and how do they kind of amend that within themselves moving on?
Alec, that's a wonderful question. That's sort of a very wise question. I think one of the things that we have to remember is that we don't get everything we want, right? So we don't get to have most of us don't get to have a good relationship with our parents. Most of us don't, which is weird, because all of us have parents. But most of us don't get to have a very good relationship with our parents. We get to have an okay relationship with them. And so our ability to hear other people and our ability to speak, rationally is based on us feeling okay with ourselves. So the way to do that is to, first of all, try to take care of ourselves, get to become less need others, right? Like when we're very vulnerable, when we're feeling desperate, we begin to turn to everyone to meet needs that they can't satisfy. And when we do that, we can't communicate, because even though what they're saying might be reasonable, we can't hear them. And then we're unable to accept the fact that sometimes that they can't hear us because they have their own noise in their head. So I think the easiest way to communicate, the best way to get to that, is by taking care of ourselves. And by taking care of ourselves, we can move towards closure, because we can then say, oh, this just didn't work out.
Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you so much for meeting with us again. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed your book. I'm actually wanting to write a book someday, so this really inspired me to kind of like listen to all your point of view and stuff. So I'm just curious to know if writing this book and sharing your family story was therapeutic to you, or a form of therapy, like for you in a way.
I've been in therapy, right? I've gone to therapy. I don't know if you have. It's lovely. I would strongly recommend it. It was much more productive than therapy, because therapy, you go once or twice a week, whereas this is 5 hours every single day. But the lessons learned from it, the writing the book created troubles inside me, right? Because to spend so much time thinking about things like this is bound to sort of create tumult, right? Emotional sort of confusion. And then I had to sort of deal with that tumult outside of the 5 hours I was writing. And so the benefit of writing the book came not from writing the book, but because the book generated so many different problems that I had to grapple with these problems. So it wasn't that the book solved anything. Instead, the book made things worse. And then I had to deal with these problems. So imagine that you're in some sort of weird abusive relationship, right? Which was my relationship with my book. Like basically, I was like a battered wife, is sort of how I think about it. But the fact that it abused me led me to then think about, what do I need to do to take care of myself? How do I get into this situation? So, I mean, that's sort of how I would just describe it.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Of course.
All right. Again, thank you, Mr. Sharma, for being here today. I think I deeply resonated with your book because I have similarities in my life. I was born to immigrant parents, and being here in the US, my mom was involved in a freak accident. And so then I had to take that role of caretaker. And so a lot of what you went through, I think I went through as well. And I was previously going to ask the question about how you decided to include certain things, but you kind of talked about that in the beginning before the course started. So I kind of want to change gears and kind of piggyback off of what Ashley said. And I want to ask you, did you ever feel shame or regret for publishing the story? and how did you justify to yourself publishing the story and just having your family life out there?
So did I feel shame about writing the book?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
No, I didn't feel shame about writing the book. Like, nope, not at all. I felt no shame about writing the book. It never even occurred to me. I feel lots of shame about different things. You know, shame is my close companion, but not about writing the book at all. And I'm also sorry about, you know, your mom, and I'm sorry that you've had to experience these things. What I was writing was, I was writing my own life. I was not writing, you know, even when I say I memorialized my family, what I'm really talking about is I memorialized my experience of my family. You know, and so I have every right to talk about myself. And behind it also is this tremendous need to not be alone. And so by talking about myself, I cannot be alone. I stop being as alone as I am otherwise.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess I'm the last one, I think, but I was just wondering about um sorry, if you ever felt like when you're writing about like the darker things, like how Ajay wanted to, you know, wish his brother wasn't alive, or like other these like darker thoughts, did you ever get told like you shouldn't put that in, or did you just get encouraged to put that in to like help people kind of understand the mentality of it?
You know, Emily, you guys are all asking such profound questions, you know, such super smart questions. I think when we need love most when we're doing things that we're ashamed of, right? So Emily, when you do something that embarrasses you, that's when you need somebody to put their arm around your shoulder and say, you're okay. You're a human being. This is a reasonable thing to do. And for me, you know, I put all of these things in because it's a way of saying that this is what it means to be a human being. And in a way, if you're going to tell a story, you might as well tell the truth. You know, so yeah, I when I was writing these were not the dark things that this is just what it means to be a human being. The dark things that I thought about were like inside a story, a story of physical illness, there's only so much physical suffering that you can represent because the audience gets horrified and looks away. So the dark things that I didn't put in were oftentimes the dark things about taking care of my brother. So those are the dark things that I looked away from.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful.
Good.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up for students who didn't post a question on the discussion board, but had a question or have just thought of something that they'd like to ask now.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Malwal. I really don't have a question, but comment. I really benefit from this book a lot. I'm a immigrant background, and I share a lot of ideas with my family here. And this is make a lot sense to people like us here. So I really appreciate you, and also appreciate your time to come and share with us in this class. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you.
David, did you have a question or comment?
Corbin, you gotta unmute your microphone.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for Dr. Sharma. We really appreciate for coming directly with us. We read the book, and my question is, I know you said it took you 12 years to write this book. Was it the normal range of writing the books, or was it a specific reason that took you so long? Because I think there are a lot of depression conditions that are attached. And I believe when you are writing, you encounter so many depressions. Was it those depressive acts that took you so long, or is the normal range you used to write a book? Thank you.
Thank you, David. It took a lot longer than I think is normal. I think that depression came from not knowing how to write the book and not from some sort of innate depression. I think I just didn't know how to write the book, and so it bothered me. And so after 2 years of making a hash of things, you begin to feel bad about yourself. And then 3 years go by and 5 years go by, and you begin to feel worse and worse. So I think that's where the depression came from not knowing how to write the book. Once I knew how to write the book, I felt very happy. Like my depression was specific to being trapped in this situation.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Was a comment or a question?
So I have a question. One of kind of going off of what Asia had said about how the book it kind of felt like an abrupt end, and it kind of like it left us hanging. There were a lot of parts throughout the book that I feel were kind of just that could have gone into more detail, but you didn't. And there was one section in particular that I found really interesting that was about how Aja was pretty much explaining how he got into reading books, and there was so much time spent on that section and not as much time I felt like devoted to other sections of like the ending, or that would have more detail in them traditionally. So I was just curious, why did you spend so much time writing about Aja and his interest in these books, and then kind of go and rush toward the end?
Oh, okay. That's a wonderful question. You guys are terrific. The way that you have to think about it is that the book is not designed with formal symmetry, right? So if you would have formal symmetry, right, you wouldn't have the beginning with Ajay tickling his father, right? The 40-year-old Ajay tickling his father. Instead, the formal symmetry would require you beginning with Ajay in India, and it would end with the flashlight scene, the drawing of the flashlight scene. And so to some extent, the book could work as with that. The reason this is not a typical bracketed story, right? A bracketed story where you have a beginning and then you come back to the beginning at the very end, right? That's the stories that are where the story is being recalled. The reason it doesn't have a bracketed story is that it begins with Ajay 40 or so tickling his father, and then it ends with some point before he's 40 when he's in Mexico. And so the bracket is off. It is not exactly parallel to the first bracket, right? So that's the design of it, right? The design of it is to throw you off kilter a tiny bit. So part of the design, right, to throw you off kilter is to change the pacing tremendously. So the pacing of the last chapter is much, much, much faster than the pacing of the rest of the book. So that would be so it's to take advantage of, it's to magnify the effect of the mismatched brackets. That's what's going on in terms of the pacing. I'm being very, very technical, Justin, so please ask me questions if I'm not being clear. The logic of having I don't think it's an appropriate comparison to have the ending of the chapter compared to the Hemingway section. Because that last chapter is working in a different relationship to that work, to the body of the book. If you were to think about the significance of the Hemingway chapter, it is really the significance of how the child learns to be happy, how the child learns to make sense of himself and his experience, right? So the child's growth is being displaced there. So that's and it's that growth, that displacement is also part of what is helping him get into Princeton. I don't know, Justin, if I'm answering your question. I mean, the question you're asking is a really wonderful question. And it has the simple answer is the book is designed to not be symmetrical. The reason it's designed to not be symmetrical is that we never have actual proper endings in our life. Mostly what happens is that things remain inside of us, big things that have occurred to us, and they periodically trigger infections. You know, something that occurred 15 years ago which you had thought you had dealt with will suddenly lead you to depression or will lead you to doing some weird thing. So the book is designed to reflect that reality. And that's why the ending, that's the asymmetry of the ending is intended to actually generate the experience of infection. I don't know if I'm being clear here, Justin. Could you help me?
No, I definitely think you are. That answers my question fairly well. Getting people to kind of think a little bit more and kind of take a pause and even ask this question, I think, is what you're trying to get at. And yeah, I think it's just I really respect books and movies that have more of that realist kind of perspective of, look, real life, you don't get this nice ending that makes sense and ties back to the beginning every time. And so that really, that's just something I really respect. And so, yeah, you did answer my question, definitely. And yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Great.
I occasionally had that question, interesting, come up in different courses. And I tend to understand that in terms of emotional kind of pacing. The really difficult parts in the book in terms of your life and the experience growing up in your family, the loneliness and the occasional depression and the caretaking and all of those things were long and seemed heavy. And it seemed to me that when you were, the character in the book, at least when the writing started to take off and the career started to take off, that those things moved quickly. And sometimes our experience in life when we're going through difficult, time is the same, but the feeling of the time stretches out. And and then the experience of it. And so I've kind of interpreted it that way without the technical, definitely the technical foundation that you're talking about in terms of bracketing. I didn't think about it that way, but I definitely tied it to the emotional experience and how those things can feel long and arduous. And when things seem to click, time seems to take has a different feeling. But that was my interpretation of that. And how we've discussed it in class. So I've really enjoyed listening to all of our students' questions and themes that resonated with them. In terms of the usefulness of your book, I think it's done much more than provide a platform for us to have our discussions in class. I really think that for us, issues of identity and who we are and how family is connected to that, and what happens in family life is connected to who we are. And so I think in all of your discussion here and what you've listed and identified, you really made that that connection closer for us. That in reviewing that and putting that in perspective, in maybe writing our own, whether it's in our minds, we think about those or write them out, as many students have said they might be inspired to do. So I really appreciate even giving us that, even getting closer. We've been working on getting closer throughout the semester. Now we're even closer. And as we get closer, multiple branches come out to how we can interpret and apply this for ourselves and in our lives, and definitely in working with families.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Yvette. Thank you for inviting me to this. Yvette, you're mute.
I have my students for 15 more minutes today, and we're going to discuss a quiz that we have pending. But I know I speak for all of us. We are so grateful for this opportunity and really, really enjoyed having you.
Thank you. You take care, guys. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and God bless you.
All right. We are still recording here. I remembered to record shortly after he started talking, and I'm only mentioning the recording because I think our department Facebook page might like to hear some of our discussion today. So I'm asking for your permission too. I already asked for Mr. Sharma's permission, Akhil's permission to post this. So on our Facebook page for those who may want to chime in. So is that okay with everyone here? If not, let me know. Yes? Okay. All right. Well, I thought that was great. I'm so glad that he joined us. And you know what I'm going to do for the sake of the recording? I'm going to end our class here and then just log on again, and I will not record, and we'll talk about the quiz. So if we can all log out now so that I can end. I'm not able to do that and stop the recording at the same time. So I'll see you in a few minutes.